So we'll continue to look into the coming years as we continue through 2019. Notice that Jupiter during 2019 is in the sign of Sagittarius. Now, prior to election day, it was in, for a year, it was in the sign of Scorpio, which kind of took it to a dark sort of hidden sort of dark place of really bringing to the surface the real what's going on underneath the surface, and there was a lot of expandedness around that. And as Jupiter, 2 days after the November election, moved into Sagittarius, for the next year, for all of 2019, that expanded the part of us that wants to bring more exploration goes into the sign of Sagittarius, which is about truth. What's the truth? And that's already been an issue, you know, during this time of bringing, and there's a whole other astrological thing that reflects that, of that whole experience of what's true and what isn't. But for this next year, that's going to come to a head. Jupiter is by necessity going to bring to us the demand to face that. What's true? What do we believe? What do we all believe? It's not going to necessarily unify us around that. It more just brings that to even a higher intensity of passion, really, in terms of what's the truth. And during 2019. So even if the Democrats take back the House, for the first year, again, that power might be applied to trying to bring the truth out, trying to create some sense of common facts, you know. But it really will get down to beliefs. And then at the end of 2019, as you see, as we progress month by month into the rest of 2019, it sort of Jupiter retrogrades and then goes forward. And then by next December, a year from this December, Jupiter will go into Capricorn, joining Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn. And Capricorn, again, is an earth sign. So it's going to move from that fiery sort of spiritual inspiration sort of energy to practical, down-to-earth, practical energy. And with the Uranus having moved into Taurus and Saturn for a couple of years by then, having been in Capricorn, and Pluto having worked through Capricorn for over 12 years, it starts to consolidate again that whole earthiness principle. And you can imagine that by a year from now, after this election, the realities start to set in, even on the political level, of we've got to start getting practical here. We can't keep debating truth and, you know, what we believe. It's got to be addressing practical things, which one version of that could be one practice of practicalness is compromise. Okay, that's one way to be practical on a political level, is to compromise. But another way, it's also being practical in terms of what can you really actually accomplish, and not be spending all your energy trying to fight some ideology or some belief, you know, for some version of idealism. Rather, it's like, we got problems, we need to address that. So, you know, how Capricorn starts to manifest here in this a year from now is really kind of, there's a range of how that can show up. And as I talked in an earlier segment about this, Saturn in Capricorn and Pluto in Capricorn can really bring a rather dark, authoritarian, austere version of what we're all experiencing collectively and individually, for that matter. as we continue to explore into 2020, you'll see that Jupiter continues to approach. There's in January of 2020, Saturn and Pluto actually conjoin at the exact same spot in Capricorn. Now that's a big deal. There's also going to be a solar eclipse just within a week of that. And when it takes, when Saturn and Pluto conjoin, that only happens about every 33 years or so. But when Saturn and Pluto conjoin in Capricorn, that only happens about every 500 years. It's a long cycle for those two to come together in a certain sign. And last time Saturn and Pluto came together in Capricorn was back when excuse me, I'm looking at my notes. There was starting a shifting, turning at the end of the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, where the structures of society began to be tested in a way that wore them down or toughened them or transformed them into new structures that addressed the need for real practical changes to happen. It was around the era of 1515 to 1532. And during that, prior to that time, basically in the West, the Roman Catholic Church had basically run everything. Total top-down sort of control, and the individual human being was sort of worthless in all of that. One's life didn't really matter. It was more what happened after you died. You went to heaven or hell. And but when Saturn conjoined with Pluto at that time in human culture, it was when Martin Luther posted his 95 notes on the door of the church, and basically that was one note in the symphony of things that happened that started to open up again the totality of human experience back toward a time of valuing the wholeness of human beings. That led to the eventually the Enlightenment period and so forth. It was also the beginning of the scientific revolution, and that went along with that. Good things happen, dark things happen. It's a mixture. The Spanish were conquering other parts of the world and subjecting people to things, but there was, overall, collectively, it was a shift that started to change a lot, and the church started to lose its grip as the final authority on everything. So that's one way that has shown up in the past. Now, as Jupiter continues to move forward in 2020, it too starts to join Saturn and Pluto in what we call a constellation so by the end of March, they're all together. And so that really intensifies the energy of that in a final culmination of sort of in this Saturnian Capricornian energy. And what doesn't show up here is Mars also joins that. So Mars is part of that package at that time of year in 2020 and brings that fiery need for action, because Mars is the personal will that wants to take action. And so there's that can show up as assertiveness and strength and courage. It can also show up as aggression and violence and war, and again, it's probably going to be both. There's all those parts of our being are going to be called on at that time to address what is likely to be very, very challenging, practical circumstances. Then as the year progresses into the fall, toward the 2020 election, again, Mars doesn't show up in here, but Mars will be down will have moved past there and will be square to this. Will be down in Aries, which it rules. And Aries is, again, that fiery sort of energy. So during August and October of 2020, leading up to the election, we may see some very violent times. If that's how it comes out, there will also be some very courageous times in terms of how that all shows up. It's going to be a mixture. And you and I and all of us get to decide as individuals how we're going to show up in that. And that's really the point of all this, is to realize, that we do have choices as individuals in it, even though we are by necessity part and parcel of the collective creation that we're all creating together. Just a little sneaking ahead a little bit here, as we look into the years after that, you see that Pluto eventually, in the year 2023, by the end of 2025, I guess, or 24, by the end of 2023, Pluto will move into the sign of Aquarius also. And so what got initiated as sort of this opening by Saturn and Jupiter conjoining in Aquarius, when Jupiter moves into Aquarius, really that's when the transformative possibilities of the Aquarian quality really take hold collectively. And Jupiter stays in a sign for anywhere from 12 to 20 years. I can't remember exactly what length this is, but it's a long time. So as the shift from the earth materialism starts to shift back into the mental awareness that Aquarius affords of objectivity and the collective view of humanity that Aquarius represents, we start to see the possibility here that our attention collectively starts to turn to ideas and thought forms that are stretching us past the limits of material bondage, both to address the problems we're facing on the material level in terms of innovation, because Aquarius is very innovative, progressive, and also brings the sensibility of the oneness of humanity, okay? That's also a possibility of what arises from this incubation of Aquarius in 2020. So we may see a shift in consciousness as more and more individuals awaken and bring that higher version of awareness to the Aquarian support that's there to bring us together and unite us around the progressive possibilities of what's possible by sharing the ideas and the concepts around all of that, to stretch us out of our material illusion. And then at some point, Uranus, as you notice down here, the next year will move into Gemini, which is another air sign that's also very much about learning and teaching and curiosity and sharing ideas. So it sort of builds this momentum in these outer planets and the inner planets of really really starting to shift the center of gravity, so to speak, energetically and collectively out of the materialistic perspective we've been holding for the last couple of hundred years. Now, within all this, notice also, I'm going to go back a year, notice Neptune over here, which I haven't talked about. All these years, for about 10 years or so, it's been going through the sign of Pisces. Neptune is the part of us that really connects to our spiritual heart. It's the part of us that is the love. It's how the love comes through us, that we are, the unconditional love. And Pisces is the sign that aligns with that. It's the part of the zodiac that is all about the mystical oneness and divinity of it all. And so that's been in play behind all of the rest of what I've been talking about. Neptune and Pisces, sort of bringing in this intuitive awareness of awakening people to the spiritual dimension of their being, to their soul. And to the extent that actually is really helping people wake up spiritually. As that all comes together collectively, it's sort of the 100th monkey principle of does all of what I'm saying here astrologically really kind of start to lean into the higher potential of the spiral of creating something better? Or do not enough people wake up and we're still sort of held down by the past karma of the choices that we've made collectively that kind of keep us in this darker dimension or darker perspective? As I talk about this, I'm aware that many of you who are listening have probably read, shared, been aware of the whole 3D, 5D shift, and so that's part of what is in play here. That's the part that astrology can't really inform us about. It doesn't address those boots on the ground sort of phenomena that could happen. Another version of that is, or another thing that could possibly happen is the revelation of UFOs, of input from other beings in the galaxy who start to really change the whole formula of what we're dealing with here in possibly good ways, maybe not so good ways. I don't know. That's where astrology, again, doesn't answer those kind of questions. Those are the wild cards. Those have always been the wild cards in history that astrology could never predict. But astrology does capture the flavor of the dynamics and the themes that are in play when these unpredictable wild cards have shown up in human history. Well, UFOs and dimensional shifts from 3D to 5D, that's beyond most anything that we've ever heard of historically in human experience. So those would be hugely wild cards and could totally change the nature. But they also both fit into that Aquarian theme, along with the Piscean, Neptune-Piscean theme. See? So they make sense astrologically, but there's nothing that I can look at in astrology that I can say, oh yeah, that's going to happen. So some astrologers might be willing to go there, but not me. But I'm hopeful. My own personal view in all of this and what I get out of astrology is that there is support, that there is evolving upward, evolvement to it all. And the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is even if on the material plane, it all goes to hell in a handbasket, and we get wiped out as a species, spiritually, as souls, we pick up from where we left off and continue to evolve in some way, maybe another planet, maybe another dimension. I don't know how that all works. But in the end, it's really knowing that you, I, me, you, everybody chose to be here at this time in a human body during this process. And we chose it for a reason. We bring the individuation of our soul to the individualness of our human ego in the way we experience these times. And holding the light, holding the mental awareness of the bigger picture of who we are as spirit and the evolving nature of transformation of the collective humanity, holding that in our hearts from love as who we are, is really the power we bring, that plutonium power that we have access to within ourselves to bring transformation to the creation that we are helping to create. That's how we do it. And that's our only real option as individuals in the collective, is to hold to that and do our best to ground our spirituality into form during this time of materialism as it comes to a karmic head, is to bring that love and that blessing into humanity so that the transformation can happen at its best and highest potential for all of us. So it's not about escaping. It's about holding ourselves from soulfulness in our bodies, feet on the ground, and hearts in the light.